Hello, everybody. Welcome to the first URBIS Dialogue webinar, What is Urban? That will present you with an overview of the multiple dimensions of our urban biosphere. I am very happy to welcome you all here and hope you will enjoy this webinar with us. I am Luisa Weiss from the ecology World Secretariat, and I will give you a short introduction of the technical system we are working with. So you as an attendee are now muted throughout the webinar. You cannot speak. This is because you have a listening role here. We will hear several presentations, a speech, and see several videos. But we will also have a question and answer session in the end. So if you have any questions to the panelists, the speakers, or to the videos, you can type them in the question box that you see, or you can hold them and then later during the question and answer session, raise your hand and we will be happy to unmute you so you can pose your question to us and we will be very happy to answer them to you. In case of any difficulties, you may also type them into the question box and I will be happy to assist you. I'm now handing over to David Maddox, who will facilitate this webinar for you. I hope you will enjoy it.
Hello, everyone. I'm David Maddox. I'm from the Nature of Cities, and I'm also the chairman of the URBIS group. Welcome to the first of 15 URBIS Dialogues. These are webinars that will span a large array of topics in urban social ecological system, from today's dialogue called What is Urban to dialogues about governance with respect to green cities, green infrastructure, nature-based solutions for ecosystem services, social systems, and so on. URBIS is a global network of scientists, policymakers, practitioners, and local governments that are interested in placing cities as part of the larger global ecosystem and in its functioning around energy use, biodiversity, and nature. Our secretariat is based at the City Biodiversity Center in Ickley, in Cape Town. The dialogues themselves are planned to be a monthly series of webinars for 15 months. There's a website at the bottom of the screen you'll see right now, cbc.ickley.org/URBIS Dialogues, where you can see the schedule of webinars that are coming up each month. They will be the first Thursday in every month with different hosts and a collection of speakers. Next month's URBIS Dialogue, for example, it will happen on June 4th, led by Jose Pupim de Oliveira, and the title is How to Create and Support City and Regional Policy for Effective Nature-Based Solutions to Urban Sustainability and Livability. So I do hope that you will go to our website, URBIS Dialogues, and see what's coming up and register for future URBIS Dialogues that will go on through the rest of 2015 and well into 2016. Today's URBIS Dialogue, number 1, it is What is Urban? Led by Thomas Elmqvist. We also have Sverker Sörlin, Sue Parnell, and Geoffrey West. And I'd like to introduce our host, Thomas Elmqvist, professor and theme leader at Stockholm University. Thomas is a professor of natural resource management at Stockholm Resilience Center in Stockholm University. His research is focused on urbanization, urban ecosystems, ecosystem services, land use change, natural disturbances, and components of resilience, including the role of social institutions. He serves as associate editor of the journals Ecology and Society, Ecosystem Services, and Sustainability Science. He has led the Cities and Biodiversity Project, which is, you might know, is the CBO book, cbobook.org, and currently is leading a Future Earth project called What is Urban? And part of the scoping expert group on regional and sub-regional assessments for IPIS. Please welcome Thomas Elmqvist and What is Urban?
Thank you very much, David, for that introduction. And I will start with this, what seems to be a very, very simple question, what is urban? But it turned out to be incredibly difficult to address and to give answers to, because you end up with a multitude of answers. So if you ask people on the street, what is urban? You will get a diverse set of answers that it's a place for culture, it's a place for opportunities, but it's also could be a place for crime, a place for pollution. It's a place for being connected, and it's a place for jobs. And we will get these multiple dimensions of what is urban. And as a scientist, we might ask also a lot of questions about this, and I come up with many, many different answers. But we could ask, how do we understand the urban? How do we describe it? Both in qualitative and quantitative ways. And we could ask, why are cities growing and why do they not collapse? Which is something we will actually come back to during this webinar. And what are the long distance and often invisible impacts of cities? By addressing this question, we will start with perspectives describing the urban from system perspectives. So the first two presenters, myself and Geoffrey West, will deal with that system perspective. Then the second two speakers will address much more the urban from a human perspective, from the perspective of values, equity, creativity, and the human place in urban. To introduce the whole topic, and in fact, I think to introduce the whole webinar series, we will now watch a very short movie. It's just 3 minutes, and it gives an overview of the rapidly evolving urbanization process around the world. So sit back and watch this video.
This is the story about how the world will look in 2030 and beyond. It is the story of how urbanization will change the surface of our planet and the biodiversity that is an essential part of it. Over the next 40 years, Earth will undergo the largest and fastest period of urban growth in human history. By 2050, an additional area the size of South Africa is projected to become urban. By then, 6.3 billion people will live in towns and cities, an increase of 2.8 billion from 2010. A more than doubling of the world's urban population in just 40 years. The most rapid and extensive urban expansion is occurring in places adjacent to some of the world's most biodiversity-rich areas. In many of these areas, people have limited economic and technical resources . This is the story about how the world will look in 2030 and beyond. It is the story of how urbanization will change the surface of our planet and the biodiversity that is an essential part of it. Over the next 40 years, Earth will undergo the largest and fastest period of urban growth in human history. By 2050, an additional area the size of South Africa is projected to become urban. By then, 6.3 billion people will live in towns and cities, an increase of 2.8 billion from 2010. A more than doubling of the world's urban population in just 40 years. The most rapid and extensive urban expansion is occurring in places adjacent to some of the world's most biodiversity-rich areas. This is the story about how the world will look in 2030 and beyond. It is the story of how urbanization will change the surface of our planet and the biodiversity that is an essential part of it. Over the next 40 years, Earth will undergo the largest and fastest period of urban growth in human history. By 2050, an additional area the size of South Africa is projected to become urban. By then, 6.3 billion people will live in towns and cities, an increase of 2.8 billion from 2010. A more than doubling of the world's urban population in just 40 years. The most rapid and extensive urban expansion is occurring in places adjacent to some of the world's most biodiversity-rich areas. In many of these areas, people have limited economic and technical resources to deal with the challenges that come with the growth. But urbanization also provides opportunities. Cities are hubs of change. Cities can and must take the lead for sustainable development. Cities can provide the solutions to conserve and protect nature and the ecosystems we depend on. Because we know that rich biodiversity can exist in cities, and urban ecosystems can significantly improve human health and well-being. We know that more conscious lifestyles and smarter development can help protect and support a rich biodiversity both inside and outside of urban areas. Well-functioning ecosystems can help reduce risks of water shortage, droughts, storms, and heat waves. They can help to curb environmental degradation. That is why unleashing the potential of cities is vital to securing our sustainable future.
Okay, I'm back, and I hope you could hear me. Maybe we had some technical problems. Some were able to see the video, others were not. But I think if you heard the audio, you still got the message of rapid urbanization. But my comment to this film is that we don't, even though urbanization is such an enormously important and rapid process, and we really need to understand it better, we don't have a very good definition of what is urban from a quantitative point of view. So different countries, different regions would have their own definitions on what is an urban area in terms of density of population and percent built-up area. What we do have is more of a global definition of urbanization. And here it's stated that as a multidimensional process that manifests itself through rapidly changing human population and changing land cover. And I want to emphasize two parts of that definition: rapidly changing, and that changing could mean, in most cases, growth, but it could also mean a decrease or shrinking, and we will come back to that. That there are different phases of urbanization. In many cases, we will refer to it as growth, but there could also be shrinking as part of urban development. But in most cases, urbanization we refer to with growing population, and with that comes also a growing expansion and urban land area. And as you can see on this graph, urbanization will be very different until 2030 in different parts of the world. Urbanization is quite slow in Europe, also in North America and South America, but very rapid in Africa, India, China, and Southeast Asia. And you can also see from this graph that the connection, the correlation between changes in population and changes in urban land area is very different. So in Africa, for example, for every addition of unit urban population, you have between 5 or 6 addition of units of land, urban land area, while it's more close to 1 or 2 in North and South America and Europe. So this will have, of course, important consequences that what is urban is very different in different parts of the world, and urban population and land use is also connected in many different ways in different parts of the world. But we also have shrinking urban regions, and this has not been so much emphasized in the current debate, but it's quite substantial in parts of the world like Europe, Eastern North America, and Japan. And of course, there are very different challenges and opportunities related to cities that are shrinking. And I think we're looking at these two factors, population and demography and economics. It's possible to come up with some answer to what is urban by constructing an urban typology. That on the one hand, we have affluent and rapidly growing urban areas, for example, in East Asia, parts of China, for example. We have less affluent and rapidly growing urban areas, many parts of Africa. We have affluent and no or little growth in parts of Europe and also North America. We have affluent and shrinking urban areas in Japan and Eastern United States. And we have less affluent and shrinking urban areas, for example, in Russia. And of course, the challenges and opportunities are very different. And these cities face very different futures and would need different tools and different types of policy to address future challenges. But even if you look within a typology, so here we have examples of relatively affluent urban regions that are growing rapidly. There are distinctly different patterns. So, for example, in China, we will have urbanization occurring along the coastal area and connected with high-speed communication. In Mexico, the urbanization is quite different. You have very distinct sites of very intense urbanization. And in Turkey, there is a third pattern where you have urbanization occurring in some areas, but there are large areas, wide areas over the country where it's uncertain whether it will become urbanized or not in the next 30 to 40 years. If we move from demography and sort of the spatial perspective on what is urban, we could then start to discuss a little bit on what is urban from a complex system science perspective. And if we look back, this has been a very frequently used approach to understand the urban, to have a systems approach. But historically, it's been very much focused on the urban as a social technological system, an understanding of how humans and the built environment are interacting and the feedbacks within the built system and the human system. I think what we've seen during the last couple of decades, and this will then be the theme for many other webinars during this series, is that we could also view the urban as a social ecological system. And this is something that recently emerged and is rapidly growing. And with the insight that there are living systems in the urban area that are of crucial importance for human health and human well-being. What we also see emerging within the complex system approach is a view of the urban as also an ecological technological system, and this still is largely unexplored, where there are attempts to integrate the living system with the built system in many quite sophisticated ways. And this will also be part of the webinar series in the future, where we'll explore more of this, which I think are very exciting, and a lot of innovations will be needed for developing the urban as an ecological technological system. But very likely important to address some of the most pressing future challenges we have in terms of climate change, for example. But the urban as a system is an open system, and I think we should emphasize this over and over again. So here is an example of how 1 square kilometer of urban area is dependent on import of food, water, and other resources, timber, energy, corresponding to approximately 100 times that area. But the urban area of 1 square kilometer is also dependent on ecosystems for the outflow, and that means for waste management, for uptake of carbon dioxide, phosphorus, nitrogen, and other things. And that corresponds to approximately 1,000 times the area of the urban. And so this is one way of illustrating and visualizing the urban system as an open system, dependent on multiple functions in the landscape, both near the city and at more distant levels. And I think I would end with looking at what is urban in this global perspective, that we have quite quickly moved from the rather narrow view of the urban as something that is interacting with the local hinterlands, where resources are imported from the adjacent area and waste is exported to the adjacent areas. In that system, the feedback mechanisms are quite direct. So if you overexploit your resources, or if you dump your waste and toxic waste in the vicinity, you will get the direct feedback and will act on that. And the world we're living in today is incredibly much more complex, where each city is connected in multiple ways with multiple other regions and cities around the world. So the import of food, for example, is coming from all the continents, and we export also waste to far areas at a far distance, and influence through incentives, regulations, subsidies, also the management of resources and in locations at long distances. And the result of this is a system with very obscure and indirect feedbacks, which are not very easy to understand, and also makes it very difficult for an urban consumer, for example, to know what type of if there is a choice between different food items, which actually would be better for the environment or better for social justice in other areas, because of these very complex and indirect feedbacks. So this is a complication which I think in one hand result in also a lot of vulnerability. We can only think of complex networks of transport and the risk of pandemics and disease, but I think also these complex networks represent an increased robustness or resilience to certain shocks and certain disturbances. And this is something actually that will be the theme of the next presenter, which is Geoffrey West, and we were very happy that he accepted to join us, because he is a very renowned complex system scientist. He was the president of the Santa Fe Institute for a number of years, and been focusing very much of his research on complex systems and scaling phenomena. And recently he have been doing a lot of interesting analysis on looking at cities as complex systems and starting to ask the questions why cities grow and why they don't collapse. So by that, I hope we now could switch to the talk by Geoffrey West.
Cities are the crucible of civilization. They have been expanding. Urbanization has been expanding at an exponential rate in the last 200 years, so that by the second part of this century, the planet will be completely dominated by cities. Cities are the origins of global warming, impact on the environment, health, pollution, disease.
Hello, everyone. We're setting up a
Finance,
film from a TED Talk from
economies,
Geoffrey West.
Energy,
Right with you.
are all problems that are confronted by having cities. That's where all these problems come from. And the tsunami of problems that we feel we're facing in terms of sustainability questions are actually a reflection of the exponential increase in urbanization across the planet. Here's some numbers. 200 years ago, the United States was less than a few percent urbanized. It's now more than 82%. The planet has crossed the halfway mark a few years ago. China's building 300 new cities in the next 20 years. Now listen to this.
Stay with us, everybody. We're still working on getting the film started.
For the foreseeable future, until 2050, every week. Cities are the crucible of civilization. They have been expanding. Urbanization has been expanding at an exponential rate in the last 200 years, so that by the second part of this century, the planet will be completely dominated by cities. Cities are the origins of global warming, impact on the environment, health, pollution, disease, finance, economies, energy, are all problems that are confronted by having cities. That's where all these problems come from. And the tsunami of problems that we feel we're facing in terms of sustainability questions are actually a reflection of the exponential increase in urbanization across the planet. Here's some numbers. 200 years ago, the United States was less than a few percent urbanized. It's now more than 82%. The planet has crossed the halfway mark a few years ago. China's building 300 new cities in the next 20 years. Now listen to this. Every week for the foreseeable future, until 2050, every week more than 1 million people are being added to our cities. This is going to affect everything. Everybody in this room, if you stay alive, is going to be affected by what's happening in cities and this extraordinary phenomenon. However, cities, despite having this kind of negative aspect to them, are also the solution, because cities are the vacuum cleaners, the magnets that have sucked up creative people, creating ideas, innovation, wealth, and so on. So we have this kind of dual nature, and so there's an urgent need for a scientific theory of cities. Now, these are my comrades in arms. This work has been done with an extraordinary group of people, and they've done all the work, and I'm the great bullshitter that tries to bring it all together. So here's the problem. This is what we all want. The 10 billion people on the planet in 2050 want to live in places like this, having things like this, doing things like this, with economies that are growing like this, not realizing that entropy produces things like this, this, and this. And the question is Is that what Edinburgh and London and New York are going to look like in 2050, or is it going to be this? That's the question. I must say, many of the indicators look like this is what it's going to look like, but let's talk about it. So, my provocative statement is that we desperately need a serious scientific theory of cities, and scientific theory means quantifiable, relying on underlying generic principles that can be put into a predictive framework. That's the quest. Is that conceivable? Are there universal kind of laws? So here's two questions that I have in my head when I think about this problem. The first is, are cities kind of part of biology? Is London a great big whale? Is Edinburgh a horse? Is Microsoft a great big anthill? What do we learn from that? We use them metaphorically, the DNA of the company, the metabolism of a city, and so on. Is that just bullshit, metaphorical bullshit, or is there serious substance to it? And if that is the case, how come that it's very hard to kill a city? You could drop an atom bomb on a city, and 30 years later it's surviving. Very few cities fail. All companies die, all companies. And if you have a serious theory, you should be able to predict when Google is going to go bust. Okay. So, is that just another version of this? Well, we understand this very well. That is, you ask any generic question about this: how many trees of a given size, how many branches of a given size does a tree have, how many leaves, what is the energy flowing through each branch, what is the size of the canopy, what is its growth, what is its mortality. We have a mathematical framework based on generic universal principles that can answer those questions, and the idea is, can we do the same for this? Okay. So the root in is recognizing one of the most extraordinary things about life is that it is scalable. It works over an extraordinary range. This is just a tiny range, actually. It's us, mammals. We're one of these. The same principles, the same dynamics, the same organization is at work in all of these, including us, and it can scale over a range of 100 million in size. And that is one of the main reasons life is so resilient and robust. Scalability. Okay, and we're going to discuss that in a moment. Yeah. But, you know, at a local level, you scaled. Everybody in this room has scaled. That's called growth. And here's how you grew. Rat, that's a rat, could have been you. We're all pretty much the same. And you see, you're very familiar with this. You grow very quickly and then you stop. And that line there is a prediction from the same theory based on the same principles that describes that forest. And here it is for the growth of a rat, and those points on there are data points. This is just the weight versus the age, and you can see it stops growing. Very, very good for biology. Also one of the reasons for its great resilience. Very, very bad for economies and companies and cities in our present paradigm. This is what we believe. This is what our whole economy is thrusting upon us, particularly illustrated in that left-hand corner. Hockey sticks. This is a bunch of software companies, and what it is their revenue versus their age, all zooming away and everybody making millions and billions of dollars. Okay, so how do we understand this? So let's first talk about biology. This is explicitly showing you how things scale, and this is a truly remarkable graph. What is plotted here is metabolic rate, how much energy you need per day to stay alive, versus your weight, your mass, for all of us, bunch of organisms. And it's plotted in this funny way of going up by factors of 10, otherwise you couldn't get everything on the graph. And what you see if you plot it in this slightly curious way is that everybody lies on the same line. Despite the fact that this is the most complex and diverse system in the universe, there's an extraordinary simplicity being expressed by this. It's particularly astonishing because each one of these organisms, each subsystem, each cell type, each gene has evolved in its own unique environmental niche with its own unique history. And yet, despite all of that Darwinian evolution and natural selection, they've been constrained to lie on a line. Something else is going on. Before I talk about that, I've written down at the bottom there the slope of this curve, this straight line. It's 3/4, roughly, which is less than 1, and we call that sublinear. And here's the point of that. It says that if it were linear, steeper slope, then doubling the size, you would require double the amount of energy. but it's sublinear, and what that translates into is that if you double the size of the organism, you actually only need 75% more energy. So a wonderful thing about all of biology is that it expresses an extraordinary economy of scale. The bigger you are, systematically, according to very well-defined rules, less energy per capita. Now, any physiological variable you can think of, any life history event you can think of, if you plot it this way, looks like this. There is an extraordinary regularity, so you tell me the size of a mammal, I can tell you at the 90% level everything about it, in terms of its physiology, life history, etc. And the reason for this is because of networks. All of life is controlled by networks, from the intracellular through the multicellular to the ecosystem level, and you're very familiar with these networks. That's a little thing that lives inside an elephant, and here's the summary of what I'm saying. If you take those networks, this idea of networks, and you apply universal principles, mathematizable universal principles, all of these scalings and all of these constraints follow, including the description of the forest, the description of your circulatory system, the description within cells. One of the things I did not stress in that introduction was that systematically the pace of life decreases as you get bigger. Heart rates are slower, you live longer, diffusion of oxygen and resources across membranes is slower, etc. Question is any of this true for cities and companies? So is London a scaled up Birmingham, which is a scaled up Brighton, etc., etc.? Is New York a scaled up San Francisco, which is a scaled up Santa Fe? Don't know, we will discuss that, but they are networks. And the most important network of cities is you. Cities are just a physical manifestation of your interactions, our interactions, and the clustering and grouping of individuals. Here's just a symbolic picture of that. And here's scaling of cities. This shows that in this very simple example, which happens to be a mundane example of number of petrol stations as a function of size plotted in the same way as the biology, you see exactly the same kind of thing. There is a scaling. That is that the number of petrol stations in a city is now given to you when you tell me its size. The slope of that is less than linear. There is an economy of scale, less petrol stations per capita, the bigger you are, not surprising. But here's what's surprising. It scales in the same way everywhere. This is just European countries, but you do it in Japan or China or Colombia. Always the same, with the same kind of economy of scale to the same degree, and any infrastructure you look at, whether it's the length of roads, length of electrical lines, anything you look at has the same economy of scale, scaling in the same way. It's an integrated system that has evolved despite all the planning and so on. But even more surprising is if you look at socioeconomic quantities, quantities that have no analog in biology, that have more evolved when we started forming communities 8,000 to 10,000 years ago. The top one is wages as a function of size, plotted in the same way, and the bottom one is you lot, super creatives, plotted in the same way. And what you see is a scaling phenomenon, but most important in this, the exponent, the analog to that 3/4 for the metabolic rate, is bigger than 1. It's about 1.15 to 1.2. Here it is, which says that the bigger you are, the more you have per capita, unlike biology. Higher wages, more super creative people per capita as you get bigger, more patents per capita, more crime per capita, and we've looked at everything, more AIDS cases, flu, etc. And here, they're all plotted together. Just to show you, what we've plotted here is income, GDP of the city, crime and patents all on one graph, and you can see they all follow the same line. And here's the statement: if you double the size of a city from 100,000 to 200,000, from 1 million to 2 million, 10 to 20 million, doesn't matter, then systematically you get a 15% increase in wages, wealth, number of AIDS cases, number of police, anything you can think of. It goes up by 15%, and you have a 15% savings on the infrastructure. This, no doubt, is the reason why 1 million people a week are gathering in cities, because they think that all those wonderful things like creative people, wealth, income is what attracts them, forgetting about the ugly and the bad. What is the reason for this? Well, I don't have time to tell you about all the mathematics, but underlying this is the social networks, because this is a universal phenomenon. This 15% rule is true no matter where you are on the planet. Japan, Chile, Portugal, Scotland, doesn't matter. Always, all the data shows it's the same. Despite the fact that these cities have evolved independently, something universal is going on. The universality, to repeat, is us, that we are the city, and it is our interactions and the clustering of those interactions. So there it is, said it again. So if it is those networks in that mathematical structure, unlike biology, which had sublinear scaling, economies of scale, you had the slowing of the pace of life as you get bigger. If it's social networks with superlinear scaling, more per capita, then the theory says that you increase the pace of life. The bigger you are, life gets faster. On the left is the heart rate, showing biology. On the right is the speed of walking in a bunch of European cities, showing that increase. Okay. Lastly, I want to talk about growth. This is what we had in biology, just to repeat. Economies of scale gave rise to this kind of sigmoidal behavior. You grow fast and then stop. It's part of our resilience. That would be bad for economies and cities. And indeed, one of the wonderful things about the theory is that if you have superlinear scaling from wealth creation and innovation, then indeed you get, from the same theory, beautiful rising exponential curve, lovely, and in fact, if you compare it to data, it fits very well with the development of cities and economies. But it has a terrible catch. And the catch is that this system is destined to collapse. And it's destined to collapse for many reasons, kind of Malthusian reasons, that you run out of resources. And how do you avoid that? Well, we've done it before. What we do is, as we grow and we approach the collapse, a major innovation takes place. And we start over again. And we start over again as we approach the next one, and so on. So there's this continuous cycles of innovation that is necessary in order to sustain growth and avoid collapse. The catch, however, to this is that you have to innovate faster and faster and faster. So the image is that we're not only on a treadmill that's going faster, but we have to change the treadmill faster and faster. We have to accelerate on a continuous basis. And the question is, can we, as socioeconomic beings, avoid a heart attack? So lastly, I'm going to finish up in this last minute or two asking about companies. So companies, they scale. The top one, in fact, is Walmart on the right. It's the same plot. This happens to be income and assets versus the size of the company as denoted by its number of employees. We could use sales or anything you like. There it is. After some little fluctuations at the beginning, when companies are innovating, they scale beautifully. And we've looked at 23,000 companies in the United States, may I say, and I'm only showing you a little bit of this. What is astonishing about companies is that they scale sublinearly like biology, indicating that they're dominated not by superlinear innovation and ideas, they become dominated by economies of scale, in that interpretation, by bureaucracy and administration, and they do it beautifully, may I say. So if you tell me the size of some company, some small company, I could have predicted the size of Walmart. If it has this sublinear scaling, the theory says we should have sigmoidal growth. There's Walmart. Doesn't look very sigmoidal. That's what we like, hockey sticks. But you notice I've cheated because I've only gone up to 94. Let's go up to 2008. That red line is from the theory. So if I'd have done this in 1994, I could have predicted what Walmart would be now. And this is repeated across the entire spectrum of companies. There they are. That's 23,000 companies. They all start looking like hockey sticks. They all bend over, and they all die like you and me. Thank you. Thank you.
So happy to have that message from, this is David Maddox again, happy to have that message from Geoff West. The next message we're going to get from is Sue Parnell. Sue is also not with us. We have a 10-minute message from her that's audio only, no video. You'll see the GoToWebinar welcome slide. But let me introduce Sue Parnell. Sue Parnell is a professor at the University of Cape Town in the Africa Center for Cities. Her early academic research was in the area of urban historical geography and focused on the rise of racial residential segregation and the impact of colonialism and urbanization on town planning in sub-Saharan Africa. Since 1994 and the democracy movement in South Africa, her work has shifted to contemporary urban policy research on local governments, poverty reduction, and urban environmental justice. By its nature, this research is not purely academic, but it has involved liaising with local and national governments and international donors, very much the interest of ICLEI as well. Sue is on the boards of several local NGOs and concerning poverty alleviation, sustainability, and gender equality in post-apartheid South Africa. And she serves on a number of national and international advisory panels relating to urban reconstruction. So, if we may play the Sue's message for about 10 minutes. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. My name is Sue Parnell, and I'm an urban geographer based at the University of Cape Town in something called the African Center for Cities. And I'm going to try and prompt some ideas and try to give you an overview of how some of the social sciences and humanities approach the question of what is the urban. And as we start off on that, I just want to point out that I'm going to try and explain to you why this is both a contested field and potentially also quite confusing. And I hope that what I am able to do is to give you a roadmap through some of the big divisions, because unlike many of the other sciences who are trying to think about what an urban future means, what about the urban nexus, about the centrality of cities, social scientists are perhaps less united than many of the other disciplines and the other intellectual traditions. And so what's often helpful is to try and introduce you to our family who are connected because we see social, the ideological, the political, some of those touchy-feely, harder to access kinds of questions as being central to the questions about an urban world. But we don't, as I say, necessarily agree on them. So let me try and kind of give you a bit of an overview. The first thing I think it's important for everybody to understand is that there is a very long and very well-established tradition of urban studies in sociology, in urban anthropology, in urban geography, in urban history, and each of those disciplines has an overlapping and independent intellectual tradition. That doesn't mean that there is consensus about what we understand to be the urban. And in fact, there are big debates about the definition of urban, which some people argue the definition is about its density, other people argue it's about the functions that exist, high-level economic functions versus rural functions or agricultural functions in rural areas. There's an additional confusion because not only is there no consensus on what is a city, size, density, function, or the traditional ways of defining, but also there's no definition or no consensus on the idea of what is urbanization versus what is the urban. So there tends to be a slippage between words of urbanization, the urban, and urbanity, each with really quite different sorts of meanings. So that's the first point of distinction. And those are not just definitional questions in the quantitative sense, although of course they're very, very important. You know, do we define the boundary of a city by its administrative boundary, by the urban edge, by its functional connections and networks? That's very difficult. But when you get to cities like those in Africa, where people typically have both a home in a city and in a rural context and they themselves move between places, who is urban also becomes much more difficult to define. And so social scientists, many of whom are uncomfortable with numerical and quantitative delineation of problems, are really uncomfortable in talking about what is the urban in fixed properties like areas or numbers or densities. So that's the first tricky thing. That's a very old debate. It's been going for almost 100 years. It's been resurrected recently in the light of a whole lot of new debates. And if I can just try and give you a little bit of an overview of what those debates are in the social sciences and why this is such a contested domain, I think you'll see at the other end of it why it's very difficult for social scientists and humanities specialists to engage with other natural scientists and built environment scientists and earth scientists, atmospheric scientists on the issue of cities, even though everybody agrees that this is the urban age, this is the moment when it's really critical. Perhaps I can just give you 5 ways that the notion of the urban is contested in the social sciences. And the first one is really about different disciplines. I've already talked about very different disciplines. There's a quite different set of issues within the social sciences, sociology, economics, geography, than there is in some of the humanities, art history, anthropology, some of the languages. And each of those have an intellectual tradition, sometimes one that has evolved over time with some kind of meta-theoretical questions which inform the discussion of the urban. But they don't always talk to each other. There are distinct journals, for example, where people would publish their work. Although it is also true that there's a body of material which we talk of as urban studies. And you see that in journals like Urban Studies, the journal, or the International Journal of Urban and Regional Research. So disciplinary traditions would be the first line of contestation. Who understands what the city is and how do they understand it in their geographical context? In their disciplinary context, and you can hear I'm a geographer, so I think that geography has a purchase on what are cities. Planning, of course, also thinks that it does. But we don't see the city in the same way. That's the first line of contest. The second one is a paradigmatic one. And within the social sciences, paradigms or ways of knowing are really absolutely critical. So whether you have a Marxist view or a Weberian view or a realist view, well, dictate to some extent what you see are as the overarching drivers of change, both urban change in the economic sense, urban change in the context of the built form or design, in the intellectual milieu. The way that paradigms like Marxism or Weberianism, phenomenology, we could talk about any number, post-structuralism, these shape our thinking very directly in approaching the understanding of the city. So paradigms would be the second line of contest. There are other, perhaps smaller kinds of differences, but which manifest very actively in social sciences, partly around the different methods that people use. And this comes out quite often as a distinction in terms of the scale that people think is very important. So anthropologists typically, not exclusively, but typically would look at the micro scale, the household scale, sometimes the neighborhood or community scale. Whereas political scientists are much more comfortable working at the city or the national, in fact, even the global scale. And depending on what scale you enter the urban, the city, so the kinds of processes, the kinds of actors, the kinds of changes you identify as more or less important. So scale and method are really significantly different in the framing of the city. There is at the moment a very, very significant debate going on within so-called urban studies, which really has to do with the question, in essence, of what do we understand the urban to be. But associated with that is the fourth thing that I wanted to highlight, which is the issue really of one's geographical reference point. There's a debate sometimes talked about as global urbanism, sometimes referred to as the debate about southern cities, sometimes thought of as an issue of world cities versus ordinary cities. And really, to be kind of crude about what that debate is about, it's centrally about how do we understand the city, what are our intellectual, political, and geographical reference points. And the critique is really one that says, for those theorists who have seen cities as centers of agglomeration, as centers of power, as centers of global influence, who have made cities like New York or London the epicenter of theorizing, that generates a particular understanding of cities. And the argument is that that argument is not a general understanding of cities. It can't be, because it doesn't give adequate reference, adequate acknowledgement, adequate incorporation of other reference points like African cities, Asian cities. And so there's a very vibrant literature out there on what do we understand the city to be. And I'm stereotyping the debate a little bit, but at its heart is this question of what is the geographical reference point within that. And then the final point of contestation I just wanted to highlight is one which really goes to the question of what are the issues that one sees as being important in the study of cities. Now, to some extent, this parallels and mirrors some of those disciplinary debates, because of course if you are an architect, you would be thinking that issues of scale or design are important. If you're an economist, you're going to think issues of agglomeration and production are important. If you are an anthropologist, you are likely to think that issues of identity are important. But that is associated with a very active discussion about what the essence of a city is. Are cities first and foremost sites of agglomeration, economic agglomeration, concentration of power, resources, activities? Because that's a traditional understanding of cities. Many of the things which have come up in the more recent times have been a contestation of that. Actually, the argument that cities are very fluid, they are characterized by informality, by fragmentation, by disassociation, by isolation, and that's a very different understanding of what the city is. Both of those ideas contrast very much with the sort of literatures that focus on questions of flows, whether those are natural resource flows or fiscal flows or any of those sorts of things. And so these ideas about cities are highly, highly contested. And so I just wanted to leave that with you as a way of thinking about the social science understanding, and perhaps to encourage those of you who are happily working with social scientists, wanting to work more actively with social scientists, to bear with us when we quite often have to have an internal squabble about what constitutes the city, and to perhaps listen in, because the more we're able to open up that debate, the more I think that we will be able to, communicate with each other, but to engage some of those really pressing issues. So try and see this in the context of the other contributions that are going to come through from this seminar. Thank you so much.
Okay, well, we'll continue, and we are very pleased to have with us live Sverker Sörlin, professor in environmental history at the Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm. And a short introduction to Sverker. He is a very well-known environmental historian in Sweden and across the world, and have been having positions at the University of California, Berkeley, University of Cambridge, and many other universities, published numerous books on not only environmental history, but also on science and sustainability, the Arctic, and many, many other different subjects. Sverker has published, I don't know how many books, but maybe it's 50 or even more. Sverker has been engaged quite a bit also in public debates on education and research policy, and also interested in the issues we've been talking about today on on urbanization and innovation and creativity and the urban as a home for human beings. So with this, I will give the word to Sverker, and we will certainly hear a fascinating introduction from the point of view of humanity. So please, Sverker.
Thank you very much, Thomas. It's a pleasure to be a part of this seminar or webinar. I will provide a few minutes of perspectives from the humanities on the question of what is urban. Today we're not only talking about the humanities as an isolated area of academic inquiry, but very much an area which is well connected both with the social sciences and the natural sciences. And I think there is an emerging field which we might want to call the socio-ecological humanities, which has grown out of many interdisciplinary collaborations over the past several years. And much of that work is very much relevant also for the urban. Here is just a few book titles which we can look at just to see how these fields combine from the social sciences, the humanities, and the social ecological systems analyses. This is ongoing work. Bruno Latour, for example, a French sociologist and philosopher, is a name here. We have several sociologists working. And down on the left-hand side, you see works from, we could say, from the resilience science point of view. And not that these perspectives are very easy to combine. There's a lot of friction when this integration work is going on, but it is going on, and that's, I think, a very useful message. Before moving further into a few main issues that I want to raise here, I'd like to maybe pause for a moment and ask a very fundamental question about the city, namely one which has already been touched upon in this webinar. Why do we form cities? Why do people move to cities at all? Why are they growing the way they are growing? And I think we should remember that this is not a new problem. People have been thinking about that for a long time in different cultures. More than 2,000 years ago, Aristotle, the Greek philosopher, came up with an idea which I think is still very much valid, namely that people move to cities to find an income or an outcome. They want to find a way to preserve themselves and somehow get a living, but they stay there, he says, to live a good life. So there is some particular qualities to human life in cities that may not be so easily acquired elsewhere. I think that is important to keep in mind because, as we also have heard during this past hour, there's a lot of problems in cities. They tend to be even bigger in cities than elsewhere. Crime has been mentioned, traffic jams, congestion, pollution. All kinds of problems arise in cities, and they tend to be aggravated in cities. But still, there are also qualities, and I think we need to, from the humanities and the social science, we take a particular interest in these qualities as much as in the problems. We look at them carefully. For example, what kinds of activities do people pursue? Well, we go to theaters, we listen to opera, we get together in cafes, we find restaurants, there are museums, there are squares, there are plazas and places where people get together, meet and discuss. There's a public realm that is very much part of the urban fabric. There's certainly friction too. There might be demonstrations, there might be crowds forming together, flash mobs these days with modern information technologies. So we need to always think about the functionalities of the urban. We can also think about the marketplace. Markets can be formed in small communities, but once you scale up into the urban size, you can have bigger markets, you can reach more people. So anything from politics to the arts to economics happen in different ways in different cities. Also, you need to distinguish between different kinds of processes, how the pace of them. For example, urban growth. We may think about this when we speak in the early 21st century, that this is going on with a tremendous hockey stick pace, and that's true for now for many cities, but not for all cities. Some shrink, and others have been very stagnant for a long time, and now they grow. If you look at this on a longer time scale, you find a diversity of patterns. So once there might be a temptation to find or look for universal laws behind urban growth, I think if you take the broader historical view on this, which is also, of course, the future view, you find that there is diversity here, and there is also choice. Is it always good that cities grow, you might ask? And maybe the answer is not a straightforward yes or a straightforward no. We find that this might be dependent on who you ask. Some people thrive more in cities, like them more, others dislike them. So, and this is important to say from the humanities point of view, because in the humanities we have been studying particularly these debates about cities for a long time. And I'd like to draw your attention here to a book which I really encourage you to go to the library and find and read. It's been reprinted many times. It's a book by a literary scholar from Wales, actually, originally. His name is Raymond Williams. In the 1970s, he wrote a book with a very simple title, The Country and the City. The Country and the City. It's very much a work by a literary scholar. He looked at how literature over hundreds of years had presented cities. And if you read all these books, which Raymond Williams had done, read many of them, you find a constant debate between those who seem to be in love with the city as a project and those who simply detest it. And the literature is full of that. You find very ugly depictions of cities. That's the end of humanity. It's the end of culture. Humanity can only really thrive if you live in the countryside. You should put preeminence on agriculture, whereas others argue precisely the opposite. You cultivate and ennoble the human faculties if you bring more people together, you develop more socially, and so on. I'd like to propose that this is an eternal debate, and the fact that we are now looking at a very rapid period of growth doesn't necessarily say that this has to be the case. It looks very likely for the coming few decades, even generations, that this will continue, but there is also choice. And if you go to, politics and policy is about choice, about what kind of future we wish to have, and that is, of course, very much an issue right now with global climate change and environmental change, global change in many dimensions. Is this really what we want? How can we deal with that? Also, I should say that there is an endless number of studies of individual cities, and I can't go through the list here. I just want to draw your attention to that, and there is not only studies of major cities like Chicago and Paris and London from various points of view, historical not the least, but there's also many studies of small cities. And clearly, they are not all the same. There is, again, diversity. Certain things happen in big cities that cannot happen in small cities. In fact, in many countries, even the most rapidly growing countries, the small cities aren't growing that very rapidly. So there is a growing divergence between the largest and the smallest. Now, I think we could frame, and we should frame the whole issue of what is urban carefully, and I think this is an ongoing process. We might want to think about what's going on with cities right now and what we need to do in the future as a case of major societal transformations. And I invite you to think about this concept. It is about the kind of transformations that really change in a profound way the way humans lead their lives and how we organize ourselves in society. Think of, for example, democracy, or think of industrial production. or think about the kind of ideas that are embedded in feminism, for example. These three examples are, if we think about them, we realize that these kinds of changes are really very profound. And I think the urban processes are on the same scale. And again, if we want urban developments to be sustainable, to be part of a sustainable development for a planet within planetary boundaries, and that's the PB in the second point, we must also think about this as a process, as a transformation that needs direction. If we don't direct it, if we don't demand from that transformation to take a certain pathway, it may be very dangerous. So here is again something that the humanities are very much preoccupied with. How can we deal with that? And that is a concern that is shared, I think, across the sciences, across the social sciences and the natural sciences. How can we affect what seems to be happening on an almost natural and organic way? It's a very, very major challenge, but it somehow helps us, I think, to frame it as a major societal transformation rather than something that we can steer and direct, rather than something that is just happening by some universal laws. Also, maybe we should think about urban zones in new ways. If you go back to the title of the book by Raymond Williams, The Country and the City, it was very much a dualistic view of urban and countryside. That has for a long time been a traditional view. I think now we see cities growing, enormously big cities, particularly the mega cities, that have a fairly unclear relationship with what is not urban. The linkages are very much geographically dispersed. We have seen these in the past hour during this webinar. And I'd like really to underscore that as a very important phenomenon. And maybe a zone, a wider area, an urban area, is a better way to think about it, rather than the old city, the medieval European city, for example, that was closed off by a very clear wall. The physical boundary was very clear, but I don't think that is the case anymore. And the new kind of cities that are emerging are more amoeba-like, so to speak. So if we frame urban transformation as a transition project, it will help us, I think, in thinking about cities, and also that we need to put cities on trajectories, on pathways that are both innovative and sustainable. So framing the city is really a current and major concern for us in defining what is urban. Also, there is very much an issue in the humanities to talk about values and different perspectives on cities, again stressing diversity and stressing choice. And here, a word that we have already heard is, of course, power. There is a political discussion about what is the best to do. Urban political and policy issues always create divergence. Certain communities favor one solution, other communities favor another solution. I think that is something to just take as a given. We cannot get away from that. There's no way to use either science or anything else to steer away from that. We need to somehow take it on board. And in the humanities and social sciences, we also study these processes. We try to learn from them, and we try to analyze them in order to sort things out better the next time. And also, we need to consider in this regard how to reconcile urban growth with distributional issues. Who is getting what from urban growth? What about equity between social groups, social categories? What about intergenerational justice? Those who live today should somehow be responsible not only for what is happening now, but what is going to happen to coming generations. That has been increasingly a concern in ethics and political science, philosophy, and so on in the past couple of decades, as we realize that what we do now has an effect not just in the immediate future, but for the long term. And again, climate change is a good case in point. So if we look also at the trajectories of individual cities, or groups of cities, they are very different when it comes to population density, how much space you have per capita, how much resources you use. So these are also parts of this equation. A very interesting concept, if we look at the kind of mega cities that are now emerging, is that nature still seems to be very much part of the picture. The urban is not just hard-covered, asphalted and built areas which are urban. They are also very much parks, a lot of species diversity in cities, and as cities grow, they tend to be even more diverse. So, but again, this is the green of the city is also a category which isn't clearly neatly distributed. Where will these urban natures be? Will they be good? There might be vermin. There might be disease. That's also part of the natural dimensions of the urban. Who is going to own and have access to this, or who's going to be affected by the urban natures? Again, an issue where we need to do much more work, and indeed where scientists and humanities scholars can collaborate. And also, if we develop new thinking about how cities function, new concepts have come up, for example, ecosystem services, the tendency to put some decisions onto markets and not use policy all the time. There is clearly another area where more work is needed to carve out what is the best way to pursue it. And I'm sure those will be covered in coming webinars. Finally, I'd like to invite us to look at possibilities for exciting new research that is broad and involves not just the humanities, but where humanities can collaborate with other fields. And I think we should, I'd like to single out three. There might be many more possibilities here, but just to give you a few examples.